And we're live. Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos a la orientación preconferencia de la Semana de Brownfields del Caribe, reinventando la recuperación para comunidades resilientes. Soy David Southgate, el consejero senior del Centro para Reciclaje Creativo de Terrenos, o CICLER, como dice en inglés, y ayudo a los municipios y a las comunidades a reciclar terrenos. Estamos muy agradecidos por su presencia en el día de hoy, en particular a los grupos de organizaciones que nos están ayudando en las presentaciones en el día de hoy y nos ayudó en la promoción, inclusive el Center for the Reconstruction of Habitat and EDS. Agradecemos su presencia hoy. Ustedes son un grupo de profesionales que viene de ambos territorios, de las Islas Vírgenes y de Puerto Rico. Son 30% de ustedes que considera como expertos en la materia de la recuperación y han expresado a su sentir de la importancia de la conferencia durante una encuesta en la registración. Más de 50% de ustedes ve que un tema muy importante para la conferencia durante esta semana es simplemente el concepto de resiliencia y están también buscando información sobre las solicitudes y cómo manejar los fondos federales. Están interesados también en los conceptos de estudios públicos, mejor reconstrucción, preservación histórica, gobierno municipal, arte, espacio público, alojamiento y gentrificación. En los próximos minutos voy a destacar algunas de las sesiones y como le explico, voy a explicar usar la plataforma para maximizar su aprovechamiento durante los próximos días. Tenemos 15 sesiones en total durante la semana. Se puede asistir uno o todos. Los planificadores buscando créditos de educación continua pueden aprovechar de 3 horas de créditos por cada día que estén en la conferencia. Nuestro banquete de presentaciones está listo para compartir con ustedes los proyectos innovadores relacionados a temas con la recuperación post-desastre. Todos con miras al fortalecimiento, a la resiliencia y la sostenibilidad comunitaria. ¿Y qué quiero decir con eso? Pues, escuchar de proyectos para recuperación de terrenos y esturbos, pero nuestro enfoque está en la preservación de la patrimonio, la cultura, de cuidar a los vulnerables en formas dignas, tales como nuestros ancianos y refugiados durante emergencias. Se puede dar una mirada a la conferencia a través del botón a la izquierda de la pantalla que dice Schedule o calendario o sesiones simplemente. Y en particular quiero destacar que hay una sesión de este viernes, el 21, que se llama Grupo de Trabajo Interagencial, donde la audiencia, ustedes inclusive, va a poder ver una reacción de 9 agencias estatales en vivo a la presentación de un proyecto innovador en las Islas Vírgenes. ¿Pueden imaginar ustedes participando con un tipo de interagencial grupo en el futuro y pensar cómo es que se puede mejor poner un marco de su proyecto para presentar a dichas agencias? También va a haber proyectos vinculados a la preservación de la patrimonio, tales como el siguiente video sobre la organización sin fines de lucro Rescate Playas Borinquen. Favor de tocar el video.
What is the role of community-based organizations in land recycling? Well, let me tell you, working with communities to help them pull together the Brownfields projects for revitalizing areas is truly rewarding. We see nonprofit organizations around Puerto Rico revitalizing spaces, creating new public goods and services for the enjoyment of everybody. My name is David Southgate, and I help communities and municipalities recycle land. We're here today in Punta Borinquen, Las Ruinas, in the municipality of Aguadilla on the northwest coast of Puerto Rico. We're here at the former naval facility where a sound surveillance system, Project Caesar, was once installed to monitor undersea traffic, in particular during the Cold War, looking for submarines. The facility opened in 1954 and was later decommissioned in 1976, at which time it fell into disrepair and began to be used for prostitution, drug use, illegal dumping, and the whole area became quite overgrown with tropical overgrowth. Fast forward several decades and enter the organization Rescate Playas Borinquen and their mobilization of hundreds of volunteers and money to rehabilitate this beautiful part of Puerto Rico. They've installed walking paths, lookout towers, and interpretive signing for the future enjoyment and present enjoyment of people who visit this area. Brownfields are typically a challenge for municipalities and community organizations because they look at an empty site and sometimes they see the possibility of environmental problems that may make it really complicated for them to be able to revitalize that area. This is where the assistance for the Center for Creative Land Recycling, or CCLEAR, comes in. We provide technical assistance free of charge to municipalities and community-based organizations, providing them the know-how, the experience, and sometimes just a leg up to help them move their projects forward.
My name is Mario Torres Zamora, and I am the president and founder of Rescate Playas Borinquen 501c3 1101 nonprofit organization. The mission of Rescate Playas Borinquen is to restore recreational areas and to protect nature, with the vision of creating Puerto Rico's Northwest recreational and ecological corridor, with the hopes of rehabilitating the buildings on site to make a visitor center and a community center open to the general public. CCLEAR helped us with a targeted Brownfields assessment program, an array of things from start to finish, with the application initially to finally receiving our report. This document was important for our organization for several reasons. First of all, it set a precedent that we have been working here for all these years and that we want to move forward. But not to mention the fact that this report gives us hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of information that could be used and educates us in regards to the area and used in the future for grants and other pertinent documents. I felt a bunch of different feelings: disbelief, elated. It's hard to describe because something that you've been working for so many years, for 9 years, when it all happens, you're just kind of in shock. I guess that's how I would describe it. In the future, we would like for these buildings to be turned into a visitor center that are open to the public, highlighting the recreational and protected lands. This would also serve as a community center, the headquarters for the Rescate Playas Borinquen nonprofit organization, a museum, reception hall, research center for biologists, tour guide station, conference room, recreational rent center, restroom facilities, refreshment stand, gift shop, ranger station, nursery, stables, and security.
And we're back. Wasn't that beautiful? Es uno de los lugares más bonitos de todo Puerto Rico. Pues nuestro trabajo a través del Center for Creative Land Recycling en la EPA ayudó a informar un informe, un fase 1 ambiental, que básicamente lo apalancaron la organización con una ley que firmó la gobernadora el agosto pasado, que ordenó al Departamento de Recreación y Deporte para entrar en un acuerdo de coadministración de dichos terrenos. Estamos esperando la celebración de la firma de dicho contrato. Próximamente me gustaría compartir un video de un TED Talk que explica un poquito más al fondo de qué se trata los Brownfields y por qué es un tema importante para nuestras islas. Por favor de tocarlo.
Lately, there's been a lot of talk about how communities need to be more resilient. And generally, we hear that discussion around the time when there's major storm events, major flooding. And certainly, communities do need to be able to bounce back from adversity. Whether that adversity is because of those storms or because of other negative impacts from climate change and sea level rise, or from economic disinvestment and social inequities. Many of these communities already have a tool that they can use to become more resilient, for them to bounce back. And ironically, that tool is a negative byproduct of industrialization. Redeveloped brownfield sites can help communities bounce back from that adversity. And before I give you some examples of how that's happened, let me talk a little bit about what brownfields are. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, otherwise known as EPA, defines a brownfield site as a property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. Basically, these are properties that developers and investors have shied away from over the years because of the contamination or because they think those properties are contaminated. Frankly, it's a lot easier to redevelop a property that doesn't have contamination. So the EPA estimates that there are 450,000 brownfield sites in the United States, and some industry experts think it's a lot more than that. So why do we have so many brownfield sites? To answer that, we need to go back in time, back in our history, to the Industrial Revolution, the 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s. This was a time when we created machines, when we had factory systems, when we had chemical processing. We had tanneries and mills, shipyards and rail yards. And with all of this industrial activity, we generated a lot of waste. And the common practice of disposing that waste was opening the back door and dumping it out, or pouring it into the waterway that was adjacent to the factory, or taking it to another site and dumping it there. With all of this industrial activity, we also handled a lot of chemicals. And unfortunately, we spilled a lot of chemicals into the ground. This went on for years and years and years and years until the mid to late 1900s, when the federal government promulgated rules and regulations, environmental rules and regulations, that did a number of things. It made us dispose of our waste properly. It made us handle our chemicals properly so that we were no longer contaminating the environment, or at least curtailing how much we contaminated the environment. Those laws and regulations also gave us the authority and the tools and the resources we need, including funding, to start cleaning up those properties. So brownfield sites are those legacy industrial properties, those abandoned factories, the abandoned mills, the dump sites, the junkyards, the old rail yards. But they're also the closed dry cleaners and the abandoned gas stations that we see today. So I want you to imagine for a moment the town that you grew up in, or the town you live in now. And in the center of the town, there's a big old factory. Used to employ a lot of people in your town, but it's closed, and it's been closed for years and years, probably your entire life. Or imagine the river that goes through your town, and on the waterfront is an old mill. Again, used to employ a lot of people. That closed years ago. So imagine what that looks like in your town and what that feels like in your town. Having a brownfield site in a community poses a lot of negative impacts to that community. Negative social, environmental, and economic impacts. Brownfields can contribute to neighborhood deterioration. They can contribute to the negative perception of the neighborhood. They can attract vandals and open dumping and other illegal and unwanted activities. They can degrade soil, water, and air quality. They can pose potential harm to animals and vegetation, as well as public health. They also can lower property values, not only for that site, but the properties around that site. They can reduce employment opportunities, lead to a loss of tax revenue, and limit economic growth. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has done a tremendous job at helping communities clean up and redevelop their brownfield sites. Since they began their program in 1995, they have granted millions and millions of dollars to communities to help them. They've created tools and resources. They've provided technical assistance to communities. As a matter of fact, here at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, we are an EPA-designated technical assistance to brownfields communities grantee or provider, which means with EPA funding, our NJIT TAB team has helped hundreds and hundreds of communities overcome the challenges that these brownfield sites pose to those communities. We view brownfields as opportunities for economic growth, opportunities for social equity, and opportunities to transform those former industrial sites, those contaminated sites, into community assets, and to meet the needs of the communities by providing uses such as housing and recreation, providing retail and commercial uses, providing uses for urban agriculture or healthcare facilities. We also view brownfields as a key ingredient to helping communities become more sustainable. So let me give you some examples of how a few communities have transformed their former factories, their former dump sites, their former industrial areas with an eye on resilience. The first example is in Wilmington, Delaware. The Southbridge neighborhood is about 2,000 people. It's a very low-lying area. A lot of the row homes in this neighborhood sit at 3 to 4 feet above sea level. The Christina River, which is right next to this neighborhood, sits at 5 feet above sea level during high tide. The infrastructure that was put in place to protect this neighborhood from all of this water is old and fails often. In addition, during major storm events, the combined sewer outfall system overflows. This is a common occurrence. Lots of flooding, not only in the streets, but in people's basements. So the city of Wilmington has designed a mitigation effort to help curtail this funding. They're creating the South Wilmington Wetlands Park. It's a 30-acre urban park. 14 acres of that park are wetlands. This entire area has been a dumping ground for years, and it's also an industrial area. It's the largest brownfield site in the city of Wilmington. So what the city is going to do, and actually is presently doing, is starting to remove all of that contaminated soil. They're going to restore the quality of those wetlands so those wetlands can do what wetlands are supposed to do, and that's absorb water and hold water. When you improve the quality of the wetlands, you also improve the habitat that wildlife and aquatic life depend on. So while this is a flood mitigation effort, the other benefits are this is going to be a new community open space. There's going to be opportunities for recreational activities that the community generally doesn't have now. The second example I want to give you is in Rutland, Vermont. For 40 years, the 15-acre municipal landfill accepted municipal waste. 30 years ago, that landfill was closed, and it sat dormant since then. In 2015, that site was repurposed. a 2.3 megawatt solar installation was added to that site, and that solar installation is connected to the main power grid. The reason why I give this as an example is when that main power grid goes out, and we've all experienced what that's like with blackouts, this solar installation can go offline and it becomes a microgrid, which means that it's able to provide power to Rutland, specifically to the emergency shelter. So this is a great example of energy resilience. So the first one I gave was an example of coastal resilience. This is an example of energy resilience. The last example is an example of economic resilience. Sparta, Tennessee, population about 5,000 people. In 2012, a lighting factory closed. This was the major employer in the town. 250 people lost their jobs. What was also left was a 300,000 square foot property, three vacant buildings, and a lot of contamination, PCB, heavy metal contamination. The plan was to sell this facility for salvage, which really didn't help the community from an economic standpoint. So at the same time, Jackson Kayak, which is a manufacturer of kayaks, paddleboards, coolers, was looking to expand. They already had a footprint in town, small footprint. They wanted a major expansion. So they looked to this facility and had the vision that we can repurpose this facility, we can rehab this facility. With $4 million investment, they created over 250 jobs. So this is a great example of economic resilience. So for those communities that are looking to become more resilient, look around your town. Find those brownfield sites. They just might be the key to your future resilience. Thank you.
Y estamos de regreso. Me encanta ese video porque habla de la potencial de proyectos que abonda a la resiliencia, inclusive provocan empleo. Está espectacular. Pues a continuación voy a hablar un poquito de cómo usamos la plataforma donde estamos ahora mismo. Ahora mismo en el lobby, tú puedes ver en un botón ahí arriba a la derecha para cambiar el idioma de la interfase donde está ahora mismo. Se puede cambiarlo entre inglés y español. Y a la izquierda son la lista de navegación para ir a las diferentes áreas del website, inclusive el vestíbulo, las sesiones que hablan de las distintas sesiones durante la semana, la hora de quién está presentando en los temas, voceros es la lista de conferenciantes, expositores, donde voy a llamar que ustedes visitan ahora, y conexiones es un área de networking. También voy a invitar que ustedes lo visitan ahora. Es se puede incrementar su conocimiento de diferentes soluciones y diferentes organizaciones y hacer networking para expandir sus redes profesionales. Y aunque queremos todos estar juntos, presencial, agarrando la mano, saludando, no es posible ahora mismo. Eso es la mejor opción que tenemos en este momento cuando estamos en el COVID-19, ese tiempo. Al fondo también en la configuración un botoncito que tú puedes poner un perfil personal sobre usted para hacer conocido durante la conferencia. Puedes subir a tu perfil información de su organización, un fotito, el título o el puesto de usted, una biografía profesional si desea compartirlo. Entonces, cuando conecta a lo demás, eso facilita una experiencia más completa. Pues sin más preámbulo, invito a ustedes a visitar el área de expositores o salón de exhibiciones y también conectarse a través de las varias mesas de networking que hemos planificado, no solamente hoy, pero durante el almuerzo, durante toda la semana. Y al final, me gustaría comentar que recuerde que tiene la libertad de pararse, de tomar agua, cuidarse la salud. Es muy importante que hacemos todo eso y que disfrute al máximo la oportunidad de interactuar con nosotros durante los próximos 5 días. Muchas gracias por su atención y que disfruta la conferencia.